My name is Julia Retz. I'm an artist from Brazil. I see my practice normally existing in the interaction between visual arts, furniture design, and interior architecture. I think that my background in architecture and design do inform my artistic practice, especially when it comes to site-specific installation. On one hand, there are these architectural tools that inform my artistic practice. Lately, my current work has a more critical view on architectural projects. As for example, when I look at modern Brazilian architecture and its discourse, I see that this process of constructing space can be an authoritarian process that silences and hides, from our perspective, a series of practice, knowledge, and experiences. And I believe that a critical reading of modernist architecture can be essential to think about other ways of organizing and constructing architectural spaces. After studying for several years in Europe and being taught in a Bauhaus educational system, I've realized how much a modernist Western colonial discourse and interdisciplinary aesthetic vocabulary has influenced my work. When coming back to Brazil, I've realized that the form I work is by having a practice that is related to the space where the work is built, to the environment, to the locality. Thinking about modernism in Brazil in this sense is to challenge the concept that this movement did not really inaugurate a rupture in a new form of thought and construction, which has been widely recognized as a formal identity for Brazil, but is identified with an imported replacement colonial background. For the residency, I would like to keep on investigating flexible materials, but looking more into its physical quality, its stretchness, its adaptation, the tension that the material can create when stretched. I want to think about that in parallel to how the implementation of modernism here in Brazil and its historical imaginary were built to support what we can call a self-colonization of its territory, and how this implementation process doesn't quite fit, and it's always trying to fit. How it can be stretched, tension. For instance, if I make a model of rubber, it will contain all the exact measurements of the mold it was made from, but different from a solid material, it can be adaptable, it can be stretched, can be compressed. And I want to use these qualities to talk about an architectural project that doesn't quite fit its surrounding, its environment. When I use malleable forms, I'm simultaneously exposing the fragility and strength of this idea of the monumentality of these buildings and what they represent. On the one hand, a malleable material serves as a metaphorical symbolic referent in the way that these things are not just buildings circumscribed in their solid forms, but they are ideas, representations of ideas, and in this way they are malleable to be appropriated in different ways. It's also a way of thinking that these constructions, as for example the historical heritage of São Paulo, are not just solid buildings, they are also the memory and the way in which this memory is reflected. The idea of the malleable and the fragmentary also serves as a criticism of these spaces, saying how it is something that cannot be sustained, that is not simple, that is not completely homogeneous and immaculate as it pretends to be. It carries with it a series of things which are behind it, which are systems of oppression of the most varied forms, which we articulate here in Brazil as racism, colonialism. So to subvert, to disincorporate this form from the solid state through this malleable material is a bit to expose them, to expose what's behind it. It is to use this membrane, the transparency of what is opaque, to expose what I'm criticizing. The term support structures I first heard and saw in the work of the artist and architect Céline Condorelli. So support structures as something that can sustain, hold, stand behind other things. So something that is essential but very often invisible. She talks about it in different ways, as for example friendship being a support structure, but also something very practical, as scaffolding for a building or a display for an exhibition. And I thought it was very interesting to think about structures that maybe don't seem very necessary, but are completely essential. So when I started to work with furniture, I also saw it as being support structures for different situations. As for example, chairs and tables for a school could be the support for an educational process, for a reading group, for a workshop, for a performance. And to see my practice in that key was important because I was interested in having my work interacting with other situations, activities, people, and maybe not being the protagonist, but something that works collaborating with other activities that can adapt to different situations and support different experiences and forms of inhabiting. And for me, furniture design became quite central because I saw it as an object that has a relation with the body, that can also be used through time. So an object that can be inhabited, that can be more permanent, and at the same time be adapted to different circumstances, different needs. And I think that designing and constructing furniture was also a way of thinking how that object will engage with the body, will support the body, will hold the body, and at the same time will offer different possibilities of arrangement and of use. So for me, furniture could also be an extension of thinking a space, but a space, a structure that is adapted to the body and to different necessities.